But this heat can help us grow also. The heat or the pressure of living so closely with someone else can help us face our weaknesses and work on them. Think about, okay, so we're still just setting the table here. Just keep tracking because this is important. Think about the enormous amount of work it takes to keep a caring connection for a lifetime. This effort would be impossible with the complexities of 3 people involved. The only one who can do this is the Trinity. So, can I say that again? Think about the enormous amount of work it takes to keep a caring connection for a lifetime. In other words, what it's saying is it's hard enough with 2 people. Imagine you bring a third party or a hobby or some other thing, So, forsaking is protecting. Most of us would like to avoid having to say no in life. It works. It's work. It's hard to say no. It causes anxiety. It can upset people. Yet reality dictates that in order to say yes to keeping a close marriage, you will have to say no to lots of other things. A life of yes to everything else ultimately results in a no to your marriage. Anybody want to come forward and have some prayer right now? I mean, that was good, right? It's counterintuitive for some of us. You simply do not have the time, resources, or energy to do everything you want to. Marriage involves much more than 2 loving people keeping love alive. It means doing some hard work and forsaking or leaving behind other things. This is not easy. Many newlyweds are often disheartened to find that they are constantly having to say no to many things in order to maintain their marriage. When she was single, Linda loved being active in lots of things. She had a career, friends, trips, dinners, sports, classes. She could juggle them all. When she and Tony fell in love and married, she attempted to keep them all going and take Tony along with her. Although he had been less active when single, he went along. Finally, he said, I don't like doing everything you do, but I don't like being home without you all the time either. Tony's dilemma began the boundary-setting process. Linda had a hard time putting the brakes on some activities. She felt restricted by the marriage. She even resented Tony for this. But when she noticed that they were really missing each other and their closeness was being affected, she began feeling better about the compromises she was making. Yet, as she put it, I thought marriage would be like singleness, only you take your husband along. She hadn't factored in the time it takes simply to maintain a connection. She was learning that marriage does involve forsaking some freedom to gain growth. Fortunately, Linda had the character to value Tony and forsake things that weren't as important. That's not always the case. So couples need to normalize the discipline of forsaking and make it a part of everyday life. I need to check it out with my spouse. Or, no, we need to spend some time together. Are 2 of the best things that any married person can say to protect his or her union from intruders. All intruder problems are ultimately caused by either adding the wrong thing, inappropriate people or bad influences to the marriage, subtracting the good, closeness and honesty, from the marriage, or both. You guys want to hear that again? Did you guys catch that? This is really good. Intruder problems are ultimately caused by either adding the wrong things or subtracting the good things. So wrong things being inappropriate people or bad influences. The good things would be the closeness and the honesty. The marriage relationship is a covenant between 2 adults. 2 adults. They join lives to make a more meaningful and fruitful life together. So here's the statement that is actually the opposite of what I've said. Marriage is not designed to repair the brokenness of its partners. What y'all think about that? Marriage is not designed to repair the brokenness of its partners, though it can certainly be a major healing agent. It is not designed to provide everything our families of origin didn't. Nor is it designed to be the only place we go for comfort, help, truth, or growth. To be sole support for another person would be an impossible burden on each spouse. So what do we think about that statement? Marriage is not designed to repair the brokenness of its partners. Why might that be the case? Do we agree or disagree? Or both? Thank you, Katie. Agree? Why? That's good.
You said in the past that if you're trying to get into a life, and that the other person will leave you because
Yeah. What's that? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wait, a little louder? Hmm. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I was just thinking about your guys' answers.
I also think at the same time, marriage is designed to flush out your selfishness, help you grow. So it's like a yes and a no, but it's just certain areas.
Yeah. So, you ever heard the expression happy wife, happy life? Why do you hate that one, Cliff?
It's not true. It's like,
It's not true?
it's not true. Just about as true as I'm going to take this poison and kill you.
So, unhappy wife, happy life? That's not true. No, what do you mean, though? Please.
I say a wife on a mission is a happy wife. Because the husband's on a mission.
Yeah.
As in, they're on a mission. Not, and my goal is not to make my wife happy. My goal is to serve the Lord. So that's something she can follow and get behind, or walk beside. But again, if I put my identity in her, it makes her miserable.
Yeah, that makes her, that's like asking her to be the rock in the relationship. And that's a lot to ask. It's a big ask. Yeah. Okay, so, I think the way that they're taking this, marriage is not designed to repair the brokenness of its partners. If you take that with the last sentence of that paragraph, to be sole support for another person, I think that that's how he's defining what it means to heal the brokenness in someone. And, of course, no one else can be the sole support. So ultimately, our identity and our worth is based off God because He loves us. But then we need a community to be a part of. So those are also true. The thing about your spouse, though, is they really get to see, a lot of times we're self-deceived. We can't see our own brokenness. We can see each other's much more easily. So if we go back to the previous study, the idea that healing happens when we can express ourselves, our hurts, our sorrows, our pain, our past experiences in the presence of compassion. So I think that's a little different than what he's saying, the idea that I'm going to look to this other person to satisfy me, to make up that which is lacking in me. Because, and that then it becomes like you're trying to suffocate the other person, like feed off of them, and then it becomes exhausting for the other person. But the other reason why this would, the other dynamic I think of is like a lot of times it's really, if you have two broken people coming together, then when we are at our most unlovely and we need love, it actually ends up triggering the other person's brokenness. And so that it becomes spiraling. So we then be getting, bouncing off each other's unloveliness, and we're reacting to, each other, and it just kind of downward spirals. So having, a third party, an outside party who's not emotionally attached, that can be more objective about what's going on, it can be very helpful. So marriages that attempt this often end up with a parent-child dynamic. One spouse demands that the other function as the mom or dad he never had. The other attempts to do that, then ends up feeling drained and resentful. Then the child spouse feels abandoned and unloved, yet again. Or both spouses parent each other in different ways. For example, a wife will be the only emotional contact her husband will go to. In turn, he makes all the financial and business decisions. She resents his neediness and resistance to going elsewhere. He wishes she'd help out in decision-making and take an accounting course at the local college. Either way, marriage simply does not have all the resources a couple needs. So although these needs are legitimate, God intended them to be met in many other ways than for each spouse to reparent the other. Jesus referred to these ways when he said, "For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother." We can receive the love, structure, or approval we need from those who have God's interests and values in their hearts. So the idea of community instead of just everything from your spouse. Spouses aren't always the safest places to go for certain aspects of our souls. For example, a husband may be quite nurturing when his wife is feeling weak and lonely, but he may recoil and distance himself from her when she is angry or frustrated. This poses a big problem as all our parts need to be connected to relationship. Those angry parts, as much as the weak and lonely parts, need relationship to heal and mature them. Because of this reality, we need outside relationships that can handle what the spouse cannot or will not. A word of caution, though. All good marriages need outside support, so we need to seek out the right and appropriate sources. These should be people who are not only safe, but whose influence on us strengthens the marriage bond. Find people who are for your marriage and want to help you grow together. Avoid those who play the game of, this is such good advice, poor you being married to that bad person. This doesn't help a marriage. Even further, avoid those who would like to be destructive to the bond in the guise of being helpful to you. I would like to have an adulterous affair with you, so I'm going to kind of say, secretly, covertly say things that would be destructive and throw gasoline on the fire. A wife finds a coworker who really understands her in ways her husband can't. She feels better, but her marriage is weaker. Your sources of love should not only be helping you, but also be helping you love your spouse. Is that good? Do you guys get that? That's a great boundary to have. So, is this outside influence? Is it help strengthening my marriage, or is it replacing my spouse and destroying my marriage? Need to be aware of that. Not worth it. So the intruder can be a symptom of a bigger problem. This is important. Jerry and Marcia felt that their marriage was slipping away from them. They had a full schedule with lots of involvements and were seeing more conflict and distance between them. Jerry felt he was being left out more and more by Marcia's schedule. Marcia, however, saw the problem as those who were, all those outside things that were besetting them. She felt like their victim. Where is the time, she would ask, with jobs, kids, everything else, we can't get away from it all. After some conversations with insightful friends, Marcia realized that she had been busy ever since her mother's death a year before. She had been unable to adequately grieve her major loss and had coped by allowing time intruders to come between her and Jerry. Often the intruder isn't the issue. The intruder is the result or symptom of another issue in marriage. The real issue has more to do with your relationship or your character. Sometimes something is broken in the connection. For example, one spouse is unloving or very critical and hurtful to the other. The hurt spouse invests herself outside the marriage, or the busy spouse needs to deal with some immaturity of her soul. So in Marcia's case, her allowing intruders into the marriage had little to do with her husband and much to do with herself. The very nature of marriage lends itself to allowing intruders inside the bond to disrupt it. I'll say it again. The very nature of marriage lends itself to allowing intruders inside the bond to disrupt it. So let me just back up and make sure we caught that. So she's not wanting to grieve her mother's death, so she's doing all these, distracting herself with all this busyness. The result is the distance in the relationship. Where's the other one? Just one moment, sorry about that. One spouse, he says, for example, one spouse is unloving or very critical and hurtful to the other. And then, of course, foolishly, the other spouse could go to another third party to make up that which is lacking. So what's not justifying anyone going to a third party ever, but we can see like if that need is being met at home, it's going to help protect your spouse from being tempted by a third party, right? So underlying issue. Sometimes the third parties, the intruders, are the result of something in the relationship or in the character of one of the husband or the wife in the relationship. Because nature abhors a vacuum, some distance or vacuum in the marital bond conveniently becomes filled with busyness. When a marriage contains conflict or hurt, we tend to busy ourselves in other people and activities. We catch this? This is really good. If there's conflict, most of us, our knee-jerk response to conflict in a marriage is avoidance. Agree or disagree? Agree or disagree, guys? Avoidance. It's the easiest. It takes the least amount of energy and effort. So let's distract ourselves. Let's have a fun time, and then we can sweep it under the rug and get over it. But then it keeps emerging, and it keeps emerging. And remember, we used the illustration of the doorway between us and our relationship. If there's bricks, those bricks are unresolved things that have happened. So one party may feel like, oh, I'm happy to distract ourselves. Let's go have a good time and act like none of that stuff has happened. That way we can avoid having all those confrontational conversations. But then the other person is like, I'm not so happy with avoiding all that. We need to sit down and have a healthy conversation so I can get closure on all these things. Avoidance. So we tend to busy ourselves in other people and activities. Busyness is less painful than facing some seemingly unsolvable problem in love day after day. Busyness is less painful than facing some seemingly unsolvable problem in love day after day. One of the things you have to realize is that we don't want to face that thing. We associate that conversation, let me back up. Just a little bit of back and forth we had just now at the beginning of this night, it was just a couple challenging questions that were up there, right? They weren't like the most challenging, but they were pretty real, right? So a lot of times we associate that with something that is lacking in us. We feel in other words, we associate that, we project on those questions, that kind of conversation, our shame. You ever have something that you know you need to do, but you procrastinate, you put it off? So it's like, okay, I'm afraid of the feelings I'm going to feel if I get in that situation, if I get in that conversation. And so we find ourselves even subconsciously trying to do all these other things. Oh, I'd love to have the conversation at that date night and do all those things with you, but I just can't because I got to do this, and this, I'm too busy. And, I'm just giving you one scenario. There's all kinds of things we can do to put off or procrastinate those hard conversations we need to have with someone we love. It's way easier to act like everything's fine, right? It's not worth it though. Like if you forecast that over time, you project out into the future, what's the level of intimacy like? So it's this is the part I want to say, it's so counterintuitive because we feel like facing those things, it's going to lead to pain. We all always want to avoid pain, but facing those things in a relationship is how we stay connected. I want to finish this thought. I'm going to call on you, Cliff. I want to say this goes outside the marriage relationship. This is pretty much true in every relationship. You ever have friends where something happened, you didn't deal with it? And next thing you know, they're just not in your life anymore. They kind of just drifted. That may be fine for a friendship, but how's that going to work with your spouse or even a relative, a family member, a child? You know what I mean? It's just, that's how that happens. Cliff.
Funny thing is, I was having that same conversation with my son about how the things we avoid, because he's talking about getting married and trying to prepare him about the things not to do as a husband. And I gave him the example of how I used to hide my mail from my wife. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
You made it your mission to tell her that it's the right to open every piece of mail.
Yeah. Quick question, and I'm not trying to lead the witness here. Was it as bad as you thought it might have been? Yes? No? Kind of?
I think it could have been because we could have gone down the rabbit hole of our feelings.
Yeah.
Third party, talking us through it, saying, I think you're really good at saying, hey, you have this option, you have
Yeah.
this option, and it's like, oh, we have options here? When we're by ourselves, it's so easy to get trapped.
Yeah, because it's like that repetitive thinking.
Yeah.
We always go dink to dink to dink and always end up in the same place.
Right. So I think having the third party, like the healthy third party,
Yeah.
really helped because it helped us connect the dots in a different way.
Yeah.
Pastor, there's no one like you. I'm so serious. There's no one like you. There's no one. Talk about
That's very kind.
but it's a good thing. It's like right?
Intruder.
Oh my goodness. Okay, we have to pray and go home now.
My son that story, so he wouldn't fall in that trap. I told him how I felt, I told him how Amber felt, and how we missed a wonderful thing because we didn't put it first. It like we're supposed to invest in each other, not hide it.
Yeah. God did something special with you guys, that's for sure. Tannen, did you have your hand up? Oh, thank you. You guys are very sweet and kind to me tonight. Every night. Thank you. So, if we sweep it under the rug, it'll all go away and be fine, right? No. Activity anesthetizes the deficits and pain in the connection. The problem doesn't go away, however. It erupts in other ways, such as in covert anger, sarcasm, emotional unavailability. Isn't that just true? It just is. And it's kind of, again, like, okay, it'll be better if we could avoid this, but then what results? Anger, covert anger, sarcasm, emotional unavailability. So like if you find, I'm just calling it out tonight. If sarcasm, for instance, emerges in the relationship and conversation, we know there's unresolved stuff. Well, I would want to make sure you have the right definition of sarcasm, because you might have a Cliff definition that's somewhat different. Sarcasm means cut flesh. And I don't feel like you cut flesh. You're loving. Okay. I mean, some people might, I don't know, but I don't want to be, enabling your cutting flesh, but I guess it depends on how well people know you. So, emotional unavailability. Many couples schedule date nights and trips away as the solution for this problem. These are highly important to nourish a marriage, yet many couples have been disappointed in date nights and getaways when they misunderstand the underlying problems. Things may keep cropping up so that the dates are constantly rescheduled, or the date night itself is shallow, forced, or distant because of unresolved conflicts in the marriage. Date nights are a necessary but insufficient solution for protecting a marriage. So date night is definitely, like, we want to have that on the table in our arsenal, you know, if you're going to use that word. But it's like, it's not the be-all, end-all. We cannot, it's really hard to go out and have a good time with someone if there's a bunch of unresolved conflict, right? Now, it can be helpful, but like, I want to say, like, and I always say this, but the intimacy we have, physical intimacy, I say it this way, physical intimacy is a reflection of the emotional intimacy. And sometimes couples are using physical intimacy as a means to get emotional intimacy, and that doesn't usually work. Maybe in the short term, but probably not in the long term. Okay? And all you have to do is flip it, which means we have to have some of those hard conversations. Now, that's what I was saying earlier is, okay, so we see at this point tonight, it's essential to have those hard conversations to maintain the intimacy. But what do we do when those conversations trigger a fight or flight, fawn or freeze response in us, and then, because as soon as that happens, we're having a meltdown, or we're passive aggressive, or we take off, we just leave, or we are sarcastic, covertly angry, and emotionally unavailable, right? So what happens if you sit down, you try to confront something, your spouse has an emotional reaction, goes into fight or flight, and then it just goes sideways, and then you try it again and again and again? What's going to happen with that relationship? Like, a relationship, I would put it this way, like, if we can't sit down and talk about hard things, how can the relationship last and be anything like a marriage? Do you want to be naked in the presence of someone you don't trust? Probably not a good time. So I'll say it again, I love this. Date nights are a necessary but insufficient solution for protecting a marriage. So when you become aware of this situation in your marriage, you need to bring the real issue to light and deal with it. That's really hard because, like, sometimes we don't even know what the real issue is. It's so baked into our experience. So having a third party can be very helpful. Intimacy can promote intruders in marriage. What? Intimacy can promote intruders in marriage. The nature of emotional intimacy itself can make a marriage vulnerable to outside influences. When we are intimate, we experience someone's negative characteristics along with the positive ones. We don't really know our spouse until we know their faults, weaknesses, sins, and imperfections. Can I say it again? We don't really know our spouse until we know their faults, weaknesses, sins, and imperfections. Now, a lot of times, you can actually keep your spouse from knowing any of these pretty well throughout your whole dating and engagement period. That is a possibility. We've seen it happen. People come back and report after a year of marriage, I feel like I married a complete stranger. I had no idea. I think that can still be salvaged, by the way. But that's why having those hard conversations, just to actually get beneath the surface is really, really helpful if you want to feel like you actually know the person you're married to. So we experience those weaknesses, imperfections, faults. When people spend a great deal of time together, the context of safety causes them to regress. Do you guys catch that? That's so good. I'll say it again. It's just like this crazy dynamic. I think it happens to pretty much all of us, though. When people spend a great deal of time together, the context of safety causes them to regress. In other words, we get so comfortable with each other, we begin letting those imperfections show. Right? Do you guys know what I'm talking about, or is it just me? Okay, good. Yeah, like I've never seen this side of you. And why are you so comfortable showing me this side of you? Like, and all the friends that have known him for a long time are like, oh yeah, you didn't know that? Well, yeah. So that he's saying when people spend a great deal of time together, the context of safety causes them to regress. In other words, they relax. They feel more dependent and act weak, like an infant folding into his mother's arms in trust. So what happens if you begin to show the ugly parts of yourself to your spouse? What's going to happen? What are the options? Rejection or acceptance. That's a great binary way to put it. Yeah. So it can cause a fight or flight response in the other person. Like then it's just like, okay, we're reacting against each other. You did this because of this. Well, I did that because of this. And like now we're blaming each other. Or we can say, hey, I love you, but this is not good. I love you, right? I love you so much, but this is not good. And look, we need some healing here. You're like, what? I've never done that before. And then we can begin to explore that. So some beautiful things can happen. He says, not only do couples regress, but they are also more exposed. It is hard to hide one's flaws in a marriage for very long. If you need help with that, no, just kidding. But by definition, negative traits are hard to live with. So you get more comfortable, you express, your weaknesses, but then those weaknesses, it's really hard for the other person to live with. The controlling husband, the insecure wife, the critical spouse, all cause conflict and friction in a relationship. So how many husbands are going to be, show their controlling, dominating tendencies on their first, second, or third date? They probably have enough self-awareness to realize that's not attractive. So what are those three categories? Like, okay, controlling husband, insecure wife, critical spouse, all cause conflict and friction in a relationship. Intimacy then causes two threats that leave the marriage open to intruders. So do you see how that counterintuitive truth? Like, the more intimate with each other we are with each other, the more we want to kind of eject and go to someone outside the marriage. Like, oh wow, I got a really good view of the person I married. That intimacy and vulnerability led to me wanting to go elsewhere. You can see that counterintuitive truth. That's not how it's supposed to work. Kurt. Yeah, it's kind of like what we were saying last week, week before, Tunis. Yeah, but like I think what he's saying here, even more specifically, or going down that road further, is like that desire for the other is like you get to the place where it diminishes more and more and more because all you're ever seeing is like I'm this awesome pastor, but I'm behind closed doors to my wife, I'm dominating, and I have a porn problem. That would be bad. So my wife, she knows that. She's keeping my secret, and then she feels like she can't breathe and suffocate. She's having less and less desire for me, So maybe she loves being in public with me because that's the only time she gets treated well by me. So I think this counterintuitive dynamic is this, like the more we're open with each other, get to know each other, the more we relax and are more comfortable showing our weaknesses to the other person. And that's going to happen in every relationship. That's just will. That's what I'm saying. It's part of that transition from infatuation to actual love. The question is, when that happens, what do we do with it? We turn into roommates, or we divorce, or some kind of social contract. But it's an opportunity to actually grow. That's the point, and we have to figure out what that looks like. It becomes very challenging, but it's worth the challenge. So intimacy then causes two threats, I'll say this again, that leave the marriage open to intruders. The first threat is within ourselves. When we notice our vulnerability and exposure, we become frightened. So I want to say this, like if I've relaxed enough into my marriage and I have been not able to be honest with myself my whole life, and finally all the things that I'm not able to face, my wife knows them very intimately. And every time, so I begin to associate my wife with my shame. And so every time she seeks to bring, hey, Timothy, we need to talk about these things, and I'm like, I just want to shut her down. I'm either going to eject or I'm going to like rage or something. So here's 4 bullets, and I love these. When we notice our vulnerability and exposure, we become frightened. This fear can have many causes, such as the following. That's what I'm saying, is when, I'll say it again, that threat, the threat to a relationship in that moment is actually within ourselves. When we notice our vulnerability and exposure, we become frightened. That's what I'm saying. We have that fight or flight response. This fear can have many causes, such as the following. So I'm simply saying, if we can just realize that dynamic is happening, that process, like I've been, exposed enough with this person. Can you see why you need a ring on the finger? Like you need a covenant? We need to make it hard on ourselves to leave. So the thing is, I just want to say, when we have that fight or flight response, we don't have to take it out on our spouse. We can actually, in that moment, when we feel like taking it out on someone else, we can actually be vulnerable and honest with what's going on inside of ourselves. Of course, in order to do that, we'd have to actually take some time to think about what is going on with me. Why am I so angry right now? Why am I full of angst right now? And like whatever it is, if we can simply share, hey, if you can simply say something like, hey, I'm frightened, I have this fear of, or whatever you can do, it allows your spouse to come alongside you and have compassion for you. Versus if you go into a fight or flight and like you put your armor on and you get all defensive, then it causes your spouse to not have compassion for you, but to feel like they have to defend themselves against you. You see the difference? So in those moments, the most challenging moments, we have an opportunity to do this, which is the normal thing, or the opportunity to come alongside and say, I hear what you're saying. So let's make it, if we can, big ask here, let's make it easy on our spouse to love us simply by being vulnerable. So the fear can have many causes, such as the following. Fear of our spouse's rejection of our flaws. So good. If you really knew me, you wouldn't have married me. Idea. Fear of our increasing need and dependency. Fear of our uncomfortable feelings emerging more and more. I'm afraid of how I might feel if I talk about this. Can I just say something about that one, if that one's you? Fear of our uncomfortable feelings emerging more and more. Fear of how I might feel. Yeah, it's been very uncomfortable and painful to have those emotions in the past. But like in the presence of actual love, it's a different thing. And you need to know that. Don't think that A plus B equals C every single time. A plus B plus C equals D. Like you can have a different outcome in the presence of love. And that's why we say we're loved into loving. But that sentence, if we were to flesh out a little bit, is like when we are at our most unlovely and we're exposed and someone sees that, and then instead of rejecting us, they embrace us, that is transformative. So I want to say, if your spouse is struggling, the knee-jerk response is to judge and condemn them when they're at their worst or their weakest. If we can realize what's going on, we realize that they need the embrace. That doesn't mean we sweep things under the rug. I love this book by Miroslav Volf. He says, Exclusion and Embrace. The whole point of that book is we have to be able to call out the evil before we can forgive the evil. It has to be faced before it can be forgiven. Okay? So I'll say that one again. Fear of our uncomfortable feelings emerging more and more. Guilt that we are draining our spouse by our problems. So that last one, we have a community. It's not like you have to, wow, my spouse is so broken, I feel like it's a full-time job, it's a full-time project. Like, we have a community. We can bring in other people to help us. We're supposed to help each other. And you say, well, no one's going to understand. Well, anybody who's in a good place, probably chances are they didn't start out that way. Yeah, they simply responded well. Maybe not the first time or the 100th time, but at some point they responded well and grew as a result. That's why they're in the position they're in. So, many people distance themselves emotionally when they have these fears. They may shut down and withdraw, for example. Or they may feel blamed and condemned. This distance can cause a breach in the trust relationship. When this breach is allowed to continue, intruders have an opportunity to get in between the love of the couple. For example, a wife may fear that her husband will reject her feelings. She then becomes over-involved in mothering or with her friends. Yet all the while, at some level, she wants to come home to the love she first felt for her husband. I'm going to say that first part again, because this kind of covers the whole field of the possible responses. Many people will distance themselves emotionally when they have these fears. They may shut down and withdraw, for example, or they may feel blamed and condemned. Now, you could take that and use it as ammunition, simply weaponize it by saying, hey, I don't want to, use it as an excuse to not have to talk about something. Oh, I don't want to talk about that because I feel blamed, I feel condemned. When in fact, you're just using it as an excuse to not face something. Now, if your spouse is giving you that, then you would want to say something like, how can I say it different? How can I, take into consideration, you want to be as considerate as you possibly can when you're saying something hard. Remember, it's not just speak truth, it's speak truth in love. Clifford.
We tell Emma we want to face things at the present time and not when she's 10 years down the road.
Yeah, like getting diagnosed with cancer. You want to catch it as soon as possible, so I'm told. Okay, I think that's a good ending point for tonight. Next week is going to be our final week, and we're just going to spend the time looking at specific conflicts that we have. The first conflict we're going to look at is when no one did anything wrong. So I say that to entice you to come back for that final week, because they're really real life stuff, okay? Kind of saving the best for last, but I think every week's been really good. So, hey, I want to say the best thing we can do, if any of this stuff for these 7 weeks thus far, if any of these things are true for us, write them down, figure out someone to talk through it with, whether it's your spouse or a wise and trusted friend, colleague, counselor. I want to say this to give you guys some hope. Anything can be fixed. Anything. All we have to do is be willing to do the work. Really. And so that's kind of what the dating and engagement period is like. It's is this person going to stick around when things get rough? Because it will. Do they have enough character? Are they have enough commitment where they're going to be willing to do the right thing even when it's hard? Anything can be fixed. We can figure anything out together. Any questions or comments? Jeff. Yeah.
What came to mind for me was two people in a rehab falling in love and leaving the rehab. Thinking that they could fix each other. And they
What's the first thing they do when they leave that rehab together?
Have an experience that
What? Wait, louder? I'm sorry, I'm deaf.
Burning each other's flame.
Yeah. Yeah. Like your shirt, Josh. Rad dad. So I want to say that, coming back now, just a few minutes, like the idea of what's healing, what I'm going to argue is healing, is when we can be honest about our weaknesses in the presence of empathy. When I can be honest about what I'm struggling with in the presence of love, that is to say, in the presence of compassionate, feeling seen, known, understood, that is transformative. So I say marriage can be extremely healing by God's design. The healing we experience is derivative from God. Like God is using us, representing Him in the relationship, whereby, hey, I'm secure in Christ. My spouse, I don't have to take it. I don't have to react against them and take it as get all defensive. I can realize they're simply showing me their unloveliness so I can love them into loving. So in that, if we'll simply do that, instead of having a fight or flight, go into the world stops, I need to focus on them, I need to love them, then marriage can be very healing. Kurt.
Just something from my personal life. I was stuck in an automatic response to Tan, and she'd be sharing something about her day that was challenging, and I'd say, "Oh, me too." And I thought, because like if I'm with guys at work, like between us men, it gives us strength to know we're not alone, right? I wasn't, thinking about what Tan had actually needed. That was just sort of my automatic response to her. So she actually let me know, like, hey, it sort of feels like you're stealing my feelings, and you're sort of using it as a platform for your own. So she's had to remind me a couple times since it's been brought up, but it's sort of like a cool opportunity to stop and actually focus on her and to consciously make the choice.
Yeah.
No, I'm not going to just give an automatic response. I'm actually going to listen to what she's saying and encourage her to say more.
Yeah. Yeah, so good. I bet she likes that when you do that. Yeah?
And then I had a little quote to throw in at the end. The best time to plant a tree is 10 years ago. The best time is today.
So good. Yeah. I mean, now you just caused my mind to flood with all these other... So just for the listening audience, the best time to plant a tree is 10 years ago, and the second best is today? So good. That's so good. Hey, I want to commend you, Kurt. If you're actually doing that, what you just described, that's true. Well done, my friend. Proud of you.
Working on it. I'm getting the painful awarenesses right now. It's kind of the phase I'm in. Next phase is avoiding it altogether.
Yeah, good. Good. All right, please be here for next week. Don't miss out on week 8, okay? You guys can come so far. It'll be worth your while, and then we'll close it out, okay? All right, you guys are dismissed.